Hi, I'm so glad that you could join us for this week's message at Winston-Salem Friends Meeting. If you've never participated in a Quaker meeting for worship, Winston-Salem Friends is considered a semi-programmed meeting, which means that the message that I'm giving today, the Quaker choir, the prayers of concerns, all of that, what we're used to in mainstream Christian practice, is just half of the meeting for worship. The other half after the message is a time of sitting down and centering into silence in a time of what Quakers call expectant waiting, where we listen for our own inner guidance to give us a message and perhaps to share with us a message that all those who are gathered in worship need to hear from our own wisdom. That is what makes up the hour of traditional Quaker, semi-program Quaker practice. And I hope that after I finish this message, you may take some time yourself to center down and consider the words that you've heard and what you are hearing from your own guidance as to the wisdom that you carry within you. Thank you for being here. If you want to know more about Winston-Salem Friends Meeting, please go to their website and you'll be up to date as to what the plans are for perhaps worshiping together in the weeks to come. Thank you for being here. So the reading for today's message comes from the Christian scriptures in the book of Hebrews. And it's chapter 12, which is rather lengthy, and I'm not going to read it all to you, so I'll spare you. But I have kind of edited out what isn't pertinent to today's message, so you'll get the cliff notes of Hebrews chapter 12. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight that clings so closely. Let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us. Do not grow weary or lose heart. Endure trials for the sake of self-discipline. Self-discipline always seems painful rather than pleasant at the time, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have become competent at it. Therefore lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees. Make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. Unlike Moses and your other ancestors, you didn't come to Mount Sinai with all that volcanic blaze and earth-shaking rumble just to hear God speak. The ear-splitting words and soul-shaking message from God terrified them, and they begged God to stop. They were afraid to move. Even Moses was terrified. No, that's not your experience at all. You have come to the city where the living God resides. It's an invisible place populated by throngs of innumerable angels and by that great cloud of witnesses. So don't turn a deaf ear to these gracious words. God's voice to Moses shook the earth to its foundations. This time God is speaking quite plainly. One last shaking from heaven to earth, from top to bottom, stem to stern. The phrase one last shaking means a thorough house cleaning, getting rid of all your baggage, historical and religious junk, so that the unshakable essentials stand clear and uncluttered. And then do you see what we've got? An unshakable kingdom. And so it is. Let us pause for a moment to gather our hearts and minds for today's prepared message. So, as I was discerning this week's message, these words kept echoing in my mind. Do you see what we've got? An unshakable kingdom. Well, frankly, I had to search the Googles to figure out where that phrase actually comes from. And it's from this passage in Hebrews chapter 12. To give you a little of the backstory at play here, the book of Hebrews was believed to address a community of Jews who had chosen to follow the Rabbi Yeshua even after his crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension, because they were deviating from the very specific traditional Jewish practices by simply following the teachings of this Messiah. They were suffering persecutions and atrocities not only at the hands of the Romans and possibly under the leadership of the Emperor Nero, but also suffering from non-Messianic Jews. They were breaking their rules. The book of Hebrews indicates that many in this faith community had actually been imprisoned and had their possessions plundered for breaking the rules. It'd be fair to say that for these Jewish disciples of Jesus, things were all shook up. It'd gotten to the point that they'd grown weary of all the suffering, and some were yearning to go back to the ways of old, the days of old where they could at least be safe and comfortable and doing what was familiar to them. The author of Hebrews was writing to encourage them on this new journey in their lives, despite the challenges that they faced in doing it. The writer reminds us of how Esau traded his birthright for a meal and warns us not to choose short-term comfort and familiarity over long-term gain. And as we've lived these weeks and now months in the shadow of coronavirus, I'm sure that most of us are still feeling all shook up. This abrupt shift in our daily lives has left some of us feeling shocked, upset, even depressed or despairing. What was safe and comfortable now seems like a thing of the past. Our everyday lives have been drastically disrupted, and we too are yearning for the ease of familiarity. The words of encouragement we read in Hebrews 12 applies to us today. First of all, we do have a great cloud of witnesses who've suffered a lot in their lives here on earth. From Quaker history, we have the Valiant 60 to draw on. They're a great example. And then there are those who stood for equality on the Underground Railroad and in the women's suffrage movement. The cloud is full of those who are cheering us on, saying, Don't lose heart. Don't grow weary. But instead of being all shook up, the times that we're living continue to give us opportunities for deeper reflection. Just a few weeks ago, I was here as we looked at what's essential to our own spirits. What is it that we're made of individually? The unique essence that we brought into this life with us. What are the invisible fibers that are woven within you? And today's message is an invitation from me to explore a different facet of what's essential. I want us to take a closer look at what's essential to our life journey, to our personal faith, if you will. During this shakeup of what's familiar, we get to explore what is it that we're actually have been doing out of habit, especially since most of those habits have been disrupted, or some have been magnified. And then we also get to look at what actually feeds our spirits. What is it that we've been doing blindly out of habit or maybe out of tradition? And what might be calling us into a different direction in our life's journey and on our faith path? Let's go back to the closing of Hebrews 12 that I read. The writer shares the clear message that everything false is going to be shaken off. Let us shed every weight that clings so closely, every last thing, from heaven to earth, stem to stern, top to bottom. And let us run with perseverance, joy, and gratitude. You can't run very fast, very far, or very gratefully if you're carrying a big burden. I get the image of the lame man that jumped for joy when Jesus healed him of the weight of his ailments that kept him from moving forward. This time is a time for us to jettison any of the old baggage that holds us down. All that junk you've been dragging around with you. It might be physical junk. It might be people, emotional junk, mental, even psychological junk. And as the writer of Hebrews says, historical and religious junk. Whoever obscures the essentials of your life journey, the essentials of your faith practice, it's time to shake it off. Let me share with you an example from a time when my life was all shook up and I was forced to examine what was unshakable within me. It was the beginning of April 2004, and I was 1 month, 4 weeks away from finishing my 3 years, can I say, of hell at Wake Forest School of Divinity. Talk about running with perseverance. In a matter of just 3 days, I found myself sitting at the imaging center in Greensboro in a tiny office with my spouse, Tracy, and my daughter, Carly. And we heard the word cancer come from the radiologist. Time stood sickeningly still as the three of us looked at each other in absolute shock. We were stunned. Now, before that very second, like any good seminarian, I knew the Judeo-Christian scriptures inside and out. I knew book, chapter, and verse. I knew the related stories, the related histories, the socioeconomic settings, the cultural influence behind them. I had learned a lot in 3 years. But at that moment, the very point in time that the word cancer hit my brain, all that scriptural knowledge evaporated. It was gone. It was shaken off. But it made room for the unshakable essentials to stand clear and uncluttered. And through the fog of the diagnosis of cancer, I was forced to figure out, what are those unshakable essence in my life and in my faith? For me at that time, and it still is, the love of my family and the support of my friends. It was me having, and still is me having, an authentic connection to a different God than the one that was crammed into all those textbooks. I was weary, and I had lost heart. And all I could do at that time was lay aside every weight of so many words, so much learning, and such hard work. And all I could do was just sit quietly in the presence of that which is. I couldn't even be a good Quaker and sit in expected waiting. It was just a matter of sitting in the presence. It seemed to me at that time that if all the Bibles in the world were destroyed, those faith practices were the unshakable ones. Those practices, as simple as they were, love of family, support of friends, and just being in the presence, reminded me that in the throes of a challenging time in my life, I was still grounded in God and rooted in love. I could sense the working of Spirit in my life in the midst of the difficulties that I was facing at the time. So this brings me to wonder, what are the things in your life that are ready to be shaken off? What are you doing that no longer fills you up? Maybe it's just old habits that you're doing out of the motions of doing. You're just so used to doing them. It's familiar and comfortable. Maybe there's some physical, emotional, or psychological junk that you need to clear out. It could be a closet. It could be a relationship. It could just be patterns that no longer serve you. What can you intentionally lay aside? What weight can you shed that clings so closely to you so that you can unclutter your spirit and clear the path of your life's journey? And then consider this. What are the practices? What are the ways of being that you have that would deepen your life journey? Maybe even deepen your faith. Truth be told, now that we have less tradition to abide by, there are some rich possibilities for us to choose from. Like maybe for you, it's a time of daily prayer, time to center down, or time to meditate. It could be that you really are filled up by gentle movement like Qigong or yoga, or it could be paving the pavement with a good run that has you feel complete. Could be that being out in nature, like taking a walk at Renolda Gardens, that really has you feel connected to yourself and to a higher power. There are other things like reading stargazing, gardening, connecting with your loved ones. Any type of creativity is a great way to fill your cup, like poetry or art or journaling or sewing. Really, the list is endless and just as varied as we humans can be. So, in the days to come, I really would like for you to look at and consider what's ready for you to shake off. The book of Hebrews shows us that it's not easy to run the race. You'll need perseverance, you'll need self discipline. But by exploring what's essential to your life, to your walking this journey of faith, you will, as Hebrews says, lift up your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees. You will make straight paths for your feet so that whatever is lame in you will not be put out of joint. It won't be misaligned with the truth of who you are, but it will be healed so that you can run with perseverance and jump for joy and gratitude. And let us then see what you will have, an unshakable kingdom. And so it is. Amen.